three quotes I want to share with you. Well, the first one is from first one is E. Cummings, in Just Spring, and I'll let you read that. Got it? Second one is from The Wasteland, of course, because we're doing dust and magic. Got that one? And the third one is from St. Stephen Sondheim. And I think all of these have a lot of relevance to what we're doing right now. The E. Cummings is really about joy. It's really about discovering things. When you have words like puddle wonderful and mud luscious, it really is that spirit of joy that kids love. The quote from T.S. Eliot is probably one of the most debated in English literature, but I really feel like what its relevance to the toy industry is we have to ask that what if question and not be fearful about what we're going to do. We have to just ask and be part of the process, as I was saying earlier. The third one is from Stephen Sondheim, and it's from Into the Woods. If you don't know that show, I'm sorry. I recommend finding out about it. But this is really sort of careful to tale you tell, that is the spell. And children will listen, and it really is all about story. What we see going on in our culture right now, what we see in toys, are the stories that children are being told, and also the stories that they tell about themselves and share with each other. Story is how kids discover themselves in the context of a culture, define themselves in a context of culture, and share that culture with other kids. So it's really, really an important part of what we do. So I'm going to talk about 5 things that will help you create dust. Which I don't recommend, and 5 things that are really all about helping you make magic. It's really, I'm in a really dichotomous position, because on one hand I get to come here and talk about magic, and then I get to go back to my real life and see how a lot of dust sells millions of units. And it's really a problem, because we're standing sort of between marketing and getting kids to want things, and essentially the toy industry is about creating demand for something for which there is no real need. So that's part of what the toy industry does, and some people do it really well, and then when things become a fad, like Hatchimals last year, all bets are off, because that takes it completely out of the realm of play and puts it more into cultural event. So it's easier to buy a Hatchimals for $70 than a Birkin bag or a Tesla. So it really does let people feel like they're part of the culture when they have those things. So let's start with dust. First thing you can do, oh, that's bad. See, I'm bad at PowerPoint. The first one is you can create dust if you live in a bubble. And by that I mean there are toy companies out there this year whose major lead items start at $80 and go up to over $200. And that shuts out half of your audience. It really shuts out half your audience, and they're not really that good. I also am tired of toy companies talking to me about brands, because kids don't understand brands. A brand isn't something a kid wants. It's not like, oh, I want this because it's part of that brand. They want it because they want it, and they've been driven to that by either promotion or marketing and peer groups or whatever has done that to them. If you live in a bubble, you're also conducting research that is designed to validate what you want. I sat behind the mirror at a research session a couple of years ago for a major toy company, and the moderator kept asking the same question over and over again until the kids basically gave up and gave her the answer she wanted, or they were able to cherry pick from the answer that they wanted. Several years ago, I also I fielded a research study for a major company that wanted to get into toys, and all of the research came back, don't do it. They did it anyway, and guess what? It didn't work, because their customer knew. Another way you live in a bubble is being what I call ego-driven. We've talked about ego, and that's trying to impose on the market your ideas rather than organically working with the market, and not paying attention to a dynamic marketplace. It's a changing market out there, but one of the things I talk a lot about is the fact that the props may change, but play and its role in children's lives hasn't really changed, and you're not going to get kids to have a whole new behavior by doing things. A couple of years ago, there was is this being taped?
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to be a little bit abstract here. You can ask me later.
You wanna? I can turn it off.
I saw a toy that basically worked with an iPad, and you were running a toy over an iPad, and the company said to me, "Isn't this genius?" I said, "No, it stinks." And they're going, "What do you mean?" They were very angry, and I said, "So pick up the toy and put it on the iPad. What are you looking at? You're looking at the back of your hand." You know, and it's getting so involved with that idea in your bubble that you forget how is a child going to interact with that. Next thing the guarantee does is to stop thinking like a child. Now, I don't need to tell any of you guys how to think like kids. Most of you do, which I love. But it's really understanding kids' logic. I mean, think of things that have broken through. Dinosaur train. Dinosaurs on a train. And most adults go, that makes no sense. To kids, it's perfectly magical because they know dinosaurs and they know trains. And why wouldn't you put them together? Because they're 3 and that makes sense to them. SpongeBob SquarePants, you know, it's a sponge that lives at the bottom of the sea and lives in a pineapple. You know, it's that kind of crazy off-the-wall thinking that consistently breaks through. So you see things that you know, fall by the wayside. I mean, much of children's entertainment today is just awful. I mean, it's so, I can't even watch it. It's boring. And it's, you know, and I think if I'm bored, then kids are probably bored too, because they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. But we're not allowed to do things like, you know, drop an anvil on people anymore, or try to drop an anvil. My brothers and I really never succeeded at doing that. We were dropping anvils. But what we've lost track of in that is that dropping an anvil, the coyote trying to drop an anvil on the Roadrunner, is it plays with what children are beginning to understand about how the world works. That they understand that well, children back then knew what an anvil was, but they know that that's not how it's supposed to work. So it's funny that anvils aren't supposed to do that. You know, all play is experiential, so you want to know what experience am I trying to get. All play is exploratory, so have you thought about what the kids are going to do? What are they going to explore? What are they going to learn about themselves? And all play is expressive. You know, have you thought about the opportunities for that? And many times have you worked with a kid, you know, so if you've worked with a kid, you've wondered, where did that come up from? I'm going to tell you a quick story about my friend Faith. Faith was probably 7. And Faith came downstairs one day and found the dog dead at the bottom of the stairs. And that was tragic. And this happened on Good Friday. So on Sunday, they're driving to her grandmother's house for Easter dinner. And she's sitting in the back of the car and she says, "So is the dog going to come back today?" And her mother says, "Oh my God, you know, whatever." He says, "Well, no, I don't think so. Is the dog in heaven?" And she told me, "I just don't want to get into this thing. Yes, the dog is in heaven." It's quiet for a moment, and Faith goes, "So I'll see him again." And her mother is getting increasingly frustrated at this, and she says, "Yes," because she doesn't want to deal with this at the moment. There's silence for a long time, and Faith says, "But you'll see him first, right?" Which I think is the perfect way to understand constructivism. I think they're wonderful because she's taking all this disparate information and working it through to figure out how does this all fit, and it's a perfect 6-year-old thing. So you got to keep thinking like a child, which is really important. You can overcomplicate things, which is really a problem. We were talking earlier about, you know, the more features. The myth is more features mean more value. Absolutely not true. They also mean more complexity and more cost. You know, what's cool to an adult is not necessarily cool to a kid. You know, think of that scene in Big when Tom Hanks is sitting there and he goes, "It's a building that turns into a robot. Why is that fun?" You know, I see that all the time. And I go through Toy Fair and I go, "Why is that fun?" But some 35-year-old designer has thought, "Oh, it'd be really cool if the dog did this and the dog did that, and, you know, it's for a 2-year-old. And you go, "No, don't do that. What does a 2-year-old do?" You know, if you're making a computerized doll, and the marketplace may have room for a computerized doll, how much does it need to do? You know, a couple of times people say, this has 11 levels of curriculum, and it's designed for, you know, a kid. Do you really need 11 levels of curriculum? And more importantly, does your technology or your overcomplication take over the play experience? You know, we talk a lot about toys that, for want of a better word, play with themselves. The last thing you want is to be able to turn the toy on, go have your lunch, come back, the toy is still doing what it was doing, and you go, okay, was that fun? So I think it's really important, and I mentioned these twice already today. Look at the things that were successful this past summer. Slime and spinners. And they were just really, really kid-directed experiences, very simple, had a social component to them, were fun, were inexpensive, and very accessible to everybody. And I think that's another important thing. Accessibility to people is really important. And that's actually the really perfect example of ignoring the marketplace. There's a lot of toys that talk about tech, but a lot of toys are still really simple. In fact, the history of the toy industry, if you really think about it, it was nimble, market-driven, fashion-oriented. Things came in, they came out, it was really fastly done. For example, like the Toys to Life component that we talked about this at dinner last night. Things like Activision and Disney Infinity, and they came and they went. And people are trying to introduce them now, again, and they're not doing well because kids have moved on from that. I think that one of the things that's really a challenge in the market right now is what I call the megaphone of social media. You probably heard about Hatchimals last year, and people were saying, oh, these didn't work, and blah, 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 blah. When you really drill down to it, their defective rate was actually less than the standard defective rate, based on complaints, was less than the standard defective rate of most mass market toys. But it's the megaphone of social media that really pushed that out. So it became a news story and it took on a life of its own. And suddenly Hatchimals, weren't working. But it really is it's a dynamic in the marketplace that you really need to pay attention to, is how things are being done. Your example about not using putting your finger over the camera and the app doesn't work, that's a perfect example of what happens in the marketplace, because everybody with a keyboard and an opinion can be seen, and whether it's valid or not, that's just a fact. One of the things for the publicly traded toy companies is the challenges of Wall Street. Are you doing something to impress your investors, or are you doing something to actually create play? And I think that's really that's really a challenge and a bigger issue than we have time for here. But most financial analysts I talk to really think it would be much better if toy companies were privately owned, because then they could take the kind of risks that Whammo used to take in the 60s, and those guys were insane. But they did hula hoops and frisbees and Super Ball and Air Blaster and all these kinds of things that were just amazing in the market and out of the market. One of the things they put down over there was about not doing it just for the money, and I think that's a big challenge for a lot of people. You need to expand the line in order to get shelf space, and it's just a big deal. But really, creating good play at the end of the day is really what it's about. And the last thing to help you make dust is refuse to give up. That usually means oh, I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to practice the piano till I can play it. Here I mean drop it if it doesn't work. And have you ever seen a child pick up a toy and play with it and go, I know if I just figured this part out, it's going to be really fun. They don't do that. They go, I'm done, I'm on to the next thing. So it's really important to know when to shift gears, not what we're talking about, not add features to features to try and fix a bug, maybe tear it down. I'll give you a great example. A wonderful little company called Zing out of Portland had a stomp rocket, and they were going to introduce it for 2015, and it didn't work, and they couldn't get it to work. And the president of the company, tiny company, pulled it back, kept it off the market for a year, retooled it, remanufactured it, and made a lot of money from it. So, it's really interesting to see that when you make a quality product, it's really going to find an audience, and it's worth it to invest in making a quality product. So let's talk about how to make some magic. First thing, I don't need to tell you guys this either, put kids center stage and let them drive. When it's a kid-directed experience, they're going to really be in charge, they're going to delve into it. We've talked a lot about VR and AR here. It's kind of meh, except for gaming. Yours is one of the best things I've seen. I was like saying, okay, I see this could work, because we heard about what you went through to get it there. You didn't rush it to market. And that's actually kind of cool for AR. VR is another story. The best application I've seen of VR yet is at Fisher-Price, and it's not for sale. You go to Fisher-Price, and all of the designers can take their toy into a lab, and put on the virtual reality headset and perceive the toy from the size of a child. And it's really, really amazing. And it really contributed to the development of their Imaginext DC Super Friends Batbot this year. I think those names. And yeah, one of the hottest toys of the year. But I got to see it in VR as if I was a 4-year-old, and just how I would relate to it and how I had to reach. And that is such a cool use of VR. You know. And I think kids want to always say, look what I made, look what I did. Information is a currency of children. How many times has a kid come up to you and show you what they learned, what they found? And really, that's part of the expressive nature of play. Next thing is tell a story. I mean, that goes back to the Sondheim thing. It's really about telling a story. Story is the way kids get into it, and it's the way they live within a product. I always talk about you need a way in, and that way in is story. You know, the story is what gives it the relevance to a kid. You know, I look at people who create action figures based on movies, and they think kids are going to actually replicate this kind of story. You know, they watch Paw Patrol. They're going to replicate this Paw Patrol adventure. They are not going to replicate the Paw Patrol adventure. They are going to deal with whatever is going on in their lives through the characters that they know in Paw Patrol. Several years ago now, it's about 10 years ago, we talked to a mom whose daughter was being sort of bullied at school. And the way that she found this out was all her blonde Barbies were ganging up on her dark-haired Barbie. And she realized that my child is expressing this through things. And so they talked about it and found out that she was having some trouble socially at school. That's how the child was processing what was going on. So you should be asking, what story am I telling? But what story am I inspiring in the kids? And then, of course, what story are my consumers telling about me? Which is really important in this marketplace because of the megaphone of social media. Building a community is really important when you've got something out there like we talked about with slime, like we talked about with Rainbow Loom, like we talked about with other things. Kids are using YouTube and communicating with one another in ways that they haven't before. Kids from all over the world are doing things. I get on Facebook Lives with people and you see that somebody's come in from India and they're talking about a toy. It's really a global market. Somebody's from all over the world, and it really is a unified market. That helps because right now, we've got global launches of things rather than just, you know, it rolls out in the US and then overseas. But kids are really engaged, and very often they're engaged in the community. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to buy the toy. There are a lot of boys who will watch slime things, but slime just tends to skew more to girls than boys. So it's just really about the community and the awareness, and that's really important. One other product to mention is Stickbot. Not advertised. If you've seen it, it's an app that allows you to make animated movies. Again, it's that company Zing I mentioned before. They're pretty genius. And they've just done their own programming. They've kept it on YouTube. They haven't done any TV advertising. They have a huge margin, and they've created a community. If you're not into it, you're not into it. But they've gone deep rather than broad, which I think is important. Think of the value in the long term. We talk a lot about repeat play, and when we review things, we try and look at, is the kid going to come back to it, or is it going to end up kicked to the curb by December 28th? It's really important to see what are the things that kids can grow with, how can they unlock different features, how can they continue the story, and as they change. One of the reasons Barbie has survived since 1959 is that the story, Barbie is still the same inert lump of mostly polyvinyl chloride, but what's changed is how the kids relate to it relating to them. So that's part of the story. And finally, something that I think is really important is a concept called digital humanity. And this is not mine, it comes from Cheryl Byrne, who is the former chairman of Leo Burnett, and she and I have had a great conversation about this, and I look at this and I see Cosmo. I see the human element of it, because as we've said, kids are not strangers to technology. They know it's out there. It's not a wow to them. What wows them are the connections that they make with the toy, with each other through the toy. And really that's sort of, how do I express myself? How do I become more of a person? I think that one of the reasons that phones are popular for kids, it's only a tiny bit about what the phone does. It's the fact that it is a form of self-expression for the kid. And every phone is different. It might all be iPhones, but everyone is different and customizable. And when kids get together, they share around that iPhone. It's not the technology, it's the experience that the kids have. And I think that that's really what this is about. It's dealing with people as people and allowing technology to support and enhance that. And with that, I will simply say, get out and play. Thank you.